G'day and welcome once again to Beat the Reset. My name is Tim and I am the guy in the hat. And today I wanted to talk to you about the direction of BRICS, specifically with regard to China and of course the US dollar. Before I get to that, I'd like to introduce you to my new book, The Great Asset Shift. If you haven't got a copy already, this is brand new. It's only been out for a couple of months. It's doing incredibly well. The reviews are absolutely fabulous. And this talks about the 250 years of asset removal of the common man, effectively our ancestors. So it's called The Great Asset Shift. You can get a copy from my website, beatthereset.com.au. That's beatthereset.com.au. If you're not in Australia, you can buy it on Amazon. My earlier book is called Things We Were Never Told About Money, which explains essentially what the monetary system actually is, as opposed to what people believe it is, which of course is fiat currency, and of course that isn't what it is. And I also throw in this fabulous bookmark as well for you as well. So there you go, if you want to order those. All right, that's it. Let's start at the very, very top here. What we are seeing is the BRICS nations have formed essentially a core of 5 nations. Now, we know that. Anybody that's been following that would understand that for a while now, essentially since about 2011, the BRICS alliance has been gradually building an economic community on a global scale, largely because they are tired of the United States using its reserve currency for bullying tactics. And I've spoken about this previously. Bullying tactics such as sanctioning, which is one of the big ones that the United States loves to do, together with the International Monetary Fund, of course. But really what we have right now is a very interesting scenario. And if you have a look at global events, specifically what's going on in the Middle East right now, it would be very easy just to look at it as though there was this war that broke out and these people hate these people, so therefore they get to bomb and so on. You could be mistaken for thinking that. But there's an old saying that all wars are central bank wars and all wars are bankers' wars. And in this case, I do believe this has a little bit to do with the US dollar, specifically the Jewish interests in the United States, I should say, and Israel's specific influence in the US. So this is very, very timely, and I'll explain why I see and what I see happening here. And essentially, we started off this whole conversation with the rise of the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Now, the first thing you realize about these nations is they're very big and they're very, very powerful, but they also are very rich in commodities, which I've spoken about previously. Of course, Russia is one of the major suppliers of gas in the region, specifically for Europe. Of course, we have South Africa, and very, very rich in mineral deposits, and so on and so forth. But joining this group is really where I think the problem is, so that the new countries that are coming on board or have at least signed up to be part of this group, I think this is where we are seeing the groundswell effectively, because as you look at the new countries that are coming on board, you realize that not only are these major commodities countries, they are also very powerful in their own right economically, and also from the standpoint of population. So right now in the world as it stands, and I've explained this before, that 60% of economies still trade using US dollars in reserve. But I think this is changing very, very rapidly for a whole host of reasons. And to say that the United States is concerned about this would be an understatement. We always knew there would be a range of chess moves, let's just say that to be politically correct, as we were going into this reset. There was always going to be something major that was going to change the game. And I think the Middle East, and specifically what could potentially arise out of the Middle East, could potentially present a little bit of a thorn in the side for the BRICS nations. But let's go back to those BRICS nations, because as of the 1st of January 2024, there are 6 new nations that will be joining the alliance, which of course are Argentina, we have Ethiopia, Egypt is another, and of course very, very major central Middle Eastern power there. Egypt, we have Iran, of course major oil nation, United Arab Emirates, and for me, probably the big one is, of course, Saudi Arabia, another huge oil giant. And the really important thing to note here, and when you look at the chess game, and again, going back to that comment that all wars are central bank wars, when you look at a country like Saudi Arabia that has been preferencing and selling oil in US dollars since 1974, then what you realize is that a comment or a shift or a move, if you like, to basically throw their weight behind the BRICS nations, specifically China. So the BRICS nations, of course, have moved from 5 to 11. Now they're called BRICS Plus. And there are more to join. In fact, 44 in total, we suspect, will join this group. Now, 44 nations would form an economy that would be larger than the United States. Now, that is problematic on a whole host of levels for the poor old US dollar. And it does beg the question, where does the US go from here? But we may be watching the answer to this beginning to unfold, because there's this rapid acceleration, especially as the whole world's trying to transition out of cash into digital. There's a massive kind of what we call quickening effect, where things just seem to speed up rapidly, and there's a host of events all happening that would seem that are happening simultaneously. But for me, as I said, the big one, Saudi Arabia preferencing Chinese Renminbi, or Chinese Yuan, if you like, over the US dollar for trading and selling oil, which means that all countries around the world will be buying and selling oil using Chinese dollars, and of course strengthening the Chinese economy. But there's a couple of things that people don't really talk about. There's a few things that commentators seem to avoid for some reason or another, and I want to bring it to your attention. Because as a researcher, it was quite interesting to me, China's involvement in all this, because China has a little bit of a catch-22 situation, because of course they hold treasuries, they are a major trading partner with some of the Western nations, of course. It's difficult for these nations to go to war against China. I mean, you wouldn't start firing missiles at a country like China, not because China has a better weapon system, but because there are certain treaties and, of course, agreements in place, notwithstanding the signatories to the United Nations. There are 5 major superpowers that have full veto powers on the board of the United Nations, and one of those superpowers, of course, is China. So, you know, countries like United States, Russia, UK, France, and China, really, they're not going to declare war on each other, but they can do things, of course, economically to hurt each other. And of course, I think what we're watching is a maneuvering economically of all these nations trying to understand how this future economy is going to look, because whoever wins this battle is going to become effectively the world trading reserve currency. But we could end up, for the first time since bimetallism, which was back in the 19th century when we used to trade on the gold and silver standard, we may end up with something very similar, but this time with a Western reserve currency and an Eastern reserve currency. But the common denominator between BRICS and the West is China. This is the common denominator. And I'll explain. Now, you would think in years gone by, it would have been the US dollar that would have been the common denominator, but not anymore. First of all, if you look at the BRICS group, which is 11 trading nations, commodity nations, they are looking to not so much have a commodity-backed currency. There's a little bit of a misconception. A lot of the commentators around the world are saying that the BRICS currency is going to be gold-backed. That there is no evidence to suggest that. So let's be totally clear on that. There's no evidence to suggest they're going to back it with any commodities. There has been kind of this idea floated, potentially they could do that, but let's keep to the facts. They haven't done that, and they may not do that, and there's no suggestion that they could or will. However, there is a suggestion that one of the currencies needs to be picked as the trading currency, and it looks like it's going to be the Chinese Yuan or the Chinese Renminbi. And of course, that would be the obvious one to go for, because it is certainly a very, very powerful component in the BRICS group. But here's the interesting dichotomy, that if you have a look at the United States dollar and you have a look at the International Monetary Fund, which was integral to the United States Bretton Woods system, effectively, the Bretton Woods system set up in 1944, trading till 1971, which effectively was like a wholesale quasi gold standard at the wholesale level between central banks. People in the street weren't on a gold standard, but apparently the US dollar was on a gold standard. My point here is that the International Monetary Fund, which was set up in Bretton Woods, was set up for the purpose of originally essentially being the secondary reserve currency. So if the US dollar were to fall over like it nearly did in 69, then what you would see is a reserve currency kick in under the banner of the International Monetary Fund. So essentially this is the lifeboat for the US dollar. Now let's have a look at that, because this is where it gets interesting. So the International Monetary Fund, as we've recently found out, is classified as a country, apparently, according to the US debt clock. In fact, when you look at gold reserves by country, the United States has the most gold reserves, followed by Germany. And then the third country you would think would be a country as we know it, a governing body, but it's listed as the International Monetary Fund. So under countries on the US debt clock, at number 3 is the International Monetary Fund. You can't make this up, sitting under the banner, of course, of the United Nations. So it becomes even more fascinating. However, where I'm going with this is, if you have a look at the International Monetary Fund's secondary reserve currency, the special drawing rights currency, it is a basket of 5 currencies. Of course, the British pound, the euro, the Japanese yen, the US dollar, and guess what? The Chinese Renminbi. Now, don't you find that this is a fascinating lifeboat for the US dollar, that one of the currencies within the lifeboat is actually a BRICS alliance currency? So it's the interesting thing for me is the strategy becomes quite complex here, because of course one would think that the obvious thing to do would be to try to take down some of these trading economies, but that causes all sorts of complexities, because China is so intertwined with so many global economies. But my point is that the US dollar's saviour could lie in the SDR, the special drawing rights currency. So what we're effectively saying is, since the SDR draws its value from a basket of 5 currencies, and one of those happens to be a very powerful currency known as the Chinese Renminbi or the Chinese Yuan, it stands to reason, or begs the question, isn't this kind of a little bit of a catch-22 situation for the United States, that one of their saviours is actually going to be the Chinese yuan, which will be pegged to the Saudis will peg it to the sale of oil. It'll become like, instead of the petrodollar, we have now the Petroyuan or the Petro Renminbi. So this is a very complex situation for the United States. And I think the reason we're seeing something going on in the Middle East, of course, the first thing you think about from an economical viewpoint, or an economic viewpoint, when you think about the Middle East, is of course the commodity oil. That's the big one. And of course, it seems to me to be very interesting timing that Saudi Arabia have announced all dollars will be sold in yuan. There is a mention in the Middle Eastern conflict that there will be certain attacks on oil wells within Iran, which of course is a BRICS nation now. I don't think anybody's really going to touch the Saudis, between you and me, but we will see. Highly doubtful. However, this does beg the question. If you have a look at the timing, it seems to be a little bit angled towards China and a little bit angled towards oil. And of course, all at a time when the world's moving to digital. And as I revealed during the week on one of my other channels, that the International Monetary Fund is given sanction to a central bank digital currency, a full-blown, operating and functioning central bank digital currency, which was produced by the Digital Currency Monetary Authority, the DCMA. And they've produced a fully tradable, what they call store of value over time, digital central bank currency, known as UMU, Universal Monetary Unit, also known as Unicoin. And this is really interesting because it is classified as a store of value over time, which, as we know as precious metals investor, is exactly what precious metals do. So I'm going to be curious to see how a central bank digital currency will be used and traded all over the globe. And apparently it's incredibly fast as essentially the XRP tests. So the speed is comparable. So we are looking at real-time processing across border. But the Middle East conflict, again, can't say too much about that, but I do question the timing of it in relation to some of these events between BRICS and oil and China and the US dollar and so on, as we're watching, of course, the sunset on the US dollar without any question, in my opinion, and the rise, of course, of commodities. And keep your eye on gold. It is up 5% since March 2023, and it looks like we could hit a bull market. Silver is right behind it, and never forget the power of silver, which I've spoken about on a couple of other podcasts. So that's it for me, the guy in the hat. I just wanted to give you my quick view. Remember, once again, if you would like to get this book, The Great Asset Shift, it starts with the signing of the United States Declaration of Independence and finishes in the future talking about the digital assets corporations and, of course, the digital twin technologies, central bank digital currencies, and so on. It's actually quite a good read. I think you might find that very interesting. That's it for me, though. The guy in the hat. I'm going to sign off, wishing you all the best. And as I always say, make good choices.